Now, most of us believe that if somebody attacks you, you have the right to protect yourself. That's not really controversial. If somebody tries to rob you, jump you, beat you to the ground, and if you find yourself in a situation where your life could be on the line, most people are not going to sit there and say, well, you should have just let it happen. And that's why when the news of the All-Star JR situation first came out, a lot of people, based on the early police account, looked at it like a self-defense case. The whole situation started inside a Houston restaurant called Confessions, where rapper All-Star JR, whose real name is Jeremy Christopher Ford, allegedly got into a confrontation with multiple people over his chains. Police said he was wrestled to the ground. They said multiple people started beating on him. And from the outside looking in, that sounds like the kind of situation where a person is trying to survive. But then the federal complaint came out. And according to prosecutors, the story didn't end with somebody simply protecting themselves, because they alleged that after a gun fell to the floor, rapper All-Star JR picked it up, started firing as people ran toward an elevator. And that's where this case completely changed, because what may have started as a situation people viewed as self-defense has now turned into a federal case, where the rapper is now accused of possessing a firearm as a convicted felon. Because of a prior felony conviction, authorities say he had no legal right to possess a firearm in the first place. And if convicted, he could be facing up to 15 years in federal prison. So now the question becomes, when does protecting yourself turn into something that can be used against you in the court of law? And how did a case that, based on early police accounts, initially looked like self-defense end up backfiring this badly? Now, this incident happened on April 8, 2026, so not that long ago. All-Star JR is in Houston, Texas, at a restaurant called Confessions, located on Kirkby Drive. There were roughly 20 to 30 people inside the restaurant at the time, customers, staff, people just out living their regular lives. So this happened in a very public setting, regular folks nearby, a lot of them, which makes the gunfire even more dangerous. But at some point that night, the energy in the room changed. According to police, All-Star JR got into a confrontation with multiple people, and that confrontation allegedly started over his chains. Police described it as what appeared to be a robbery attempt, with multiple people allegedly trying to take his jewelry before the fight escalated. In rap culture, chains are way more than just accessories. They represent status and success, but they do of course make you a target depending on the environment you find yourself in. That's why you hear a lot of chain snatching stories in hip hop, and they hit different. It's not just seen as theft. It's about humiliation and disrespect. That's why chain snatching in hip hop has always carried a different kind of meaning. Now, eventually multiple people got involved, and what started as a theft for jewelry ended up turning into survival real fast. Now, according to police, more people got involved in this altercation, and All-Star JR was being beaten by multiple people on the floor. One of the people who would later become central to the case was Ben Anthony Fields, better known as NBA Ben 10, an associate of rapper NBA Youngboy, and he was one of the people shot during the altercation inside this restaurant. Now, based on the way the story was first reported, this is where a lot of people online started putting the pieces together. Police said the situation began with a group confronting All-Star JR and allegedly trying to take his chains. They said All-Star JR was wrestled to the ground and being beaten by multiple people, and later, Ben 10 was identified as one of the people who ended up being shot. Now, obviously, a lot of people are going to connect those dots and assume Ben 10 must have been the person who initiated the situation, but to be precise, early on the police did not confirm whether the people who were shot were the exact same people who were the ones that initiated this robbery. What we do know is this though, Ben 10 was one of the people shot during this incident, and according to later reporting, he was left with extreme serious injuries. He suffered a spine injury, and reportedly, according to court documents, his prognosis was actually irreversible paralysis of his lower extremities. So at this point, we're not talking about somebody getting hit once, going to the hospital, and then the story fades away a few days later. We're talking about an injury that can change the rest of someone's life. And whether people like Ben 10 or don't like Ben 10, that kind of damage makes the whole situation bigger for All-Star JR, objectively speaking. Because now the conversation isn't just, did All-Star JR have a reason to be scared? It's also, how did this situation go from a chain snatching attempt to somebody possibly never walking again? Once the injuries became that serious, it was no longer just a viral rap story. It became something with real consequences attached to it. Meaning, according to those records, this wasn't just a situation where somebody got shot and recovered a few days later. This was a life-changing injury. And that's the reason why this case became so serious. So now they were looking at how many shots were actually fired and when were they fired. And at that point, was the threat still active? And whether what started as protection turned into something they believe went way beyond that. Now there's another layer to this particular story, because J Prince Jr. was also reportedly present at this restaurant that night. And in Houston rap culture, that name of course carries a lot of weight. J Prince Jr. is the son of Rap-A-Lot Records founder J Prince, a very well-respected figure in the Houston scene of hip-hop. So when people found out that J Prince Jr. was allegedly at the same restaurant where this happened, speculation immediately started flying online. Because remember, The J. Prince family were the same people who organized that event where Takeoff was killed in Houston. So the Prince family's name has been tied to Houston hip-hop for decades. So anytime J. Prince Jr. is present at a rap-related incident where things go wrong, the internet immediately starts speculating. People started wondering if he had something to do with it, if he knew what was going on and was about to happen. He actually denied being involved in what happened here and said that he was there for a friend's birthday party and didn't know All-Star JR was going to be there. Now after the shooting, this went from a local Houston case to a full-blown rap internet controversy. But while the internet was focused on who was there, who knew who, and whether this started as a robbery attempt, prosecutors were focused on something else entirely. They were focused on what happened after the gun came out. Because according to the early police accounts, All-Star JR was being beaten on the ground when the shooting started. But according to the federal complaint, the details get a lot more complicated. And this is one of the most important parts of the case, because the early police account and the federal complaint don't describe the gun detail the same exact way. In the early police account, the situation sounded more straightforward. Police described All-Star JR as someone who was being beaten on the ground and then somehow produced a gun during the attack. That version is the reason a lot of people immediately looked at it as self-defense, because if someone is getting jumped on the floor and they pull out a weapon in the middle of that chaos, most people can at least understand why they felt like they had to do something. But the federal complaint paints a more complicated picture. Prosecutors allege that during the confrontation, a gun fell to the floor, and All-Star JR picked it up. Now keep in mind, self-defense is not just a label you put over an entire situation. It can change moment by moment. In 1 second, someone might be defending themselves, and the next second, it could be argued that the threat is over. And in the second after that, the same person who started as the victim can become the person accused of going too far and getting charged for it. That's why the timeline matters so much in the case. And then according to the authorities, he started firing as people ran toward an elevator. So in one version, the story sounds like someone pulling a weapon while they're actively being attacked. In the other version, the authorities are saying that there was a moment where the gun fell, he picked it up, and then the shooting continued while people were running. And that changes the way the whole situation is viewed. Because legally, obviously every second matters. Who had the gun? When did it fall? Who picked it up? Were people still attacking him? Were they running away? Was the danger still active? Those details can completely change how a case is interpreted. Now, after the first shots were fired, All-Star JR allegedly returned to where Ben 10 was already lying motionless on the ground and fired additional rounds into him. And this is the moment in this case where the surveillance footage becomes important. The footage allegedly shows All-Star JR standing over or near Ben 10. At this point, he was already on the ground and he points the gun toward his direction. I can't really show that on YouTube. But the reason this moment matters is because it becomes one of the biggest points of contention in the whole case. If you're looking at this from All-Star JR's side, at that point he had been jumped, beaten, and possibly robbed for his jewelry. So in that moment, everything is chaotic. Now where it could backfire against him is that they're going to focus on the fact that Ben 10 was already on the ground. And that changes the question here. Because the question no longer is, was All-Star JR scared? The question becomes, was this person still a threat at the moment the gun was pointed at him? And that's why this particular footage is so important. Because in a lot of these self-defense cases, the beginning of the fight matters, but the exact second force is used matters even more. And so in this case, it could be argued that the shooting had gone beyond simply stopping an attack. And again, that's of course an allegation. Innocent until proven guilty. But this is the kind of footage that can completely change the way a case is viewed, right? Now at this point is where the case ended up backfiring, in a way a lot of people might not understand at first. And it goes back to the fact that All-Star JR was previously a convicted felon. And so the question about whether he was actually legally allowed to possess a firearm at all came up. So to understand this, you have to go back to 2014, years before the shooting at Confessions. According to the Lansing State Journal, he was convicted after a long investigation into a string of home invasions at Michigan State University. And it wasn't just one random incident. Police said investigators tied All-Star JR and another man to about a dozen incidents for over a 15-day period in February 2014. And the way the police described it was someone would walk into an unlocked dorm room during the early morning hours and stealing things like computers, cell phones, cameras, cash, and other personal items. They later recovered nearly $10,000 worth of stolen merchandise and nearly $10,000 in cash. And after that, he ended up pleading guilty to home invasion charges, where he was eventually sentenced. Now that old case might seem unrelated at first because this new situation happened years later in a different state under completely different circumstances, but legally that old conviction followed him. A lot of people think once you serve time, the case is over, but legally a felony conviction can follow you for years, specifically when it comes to firearm possession. That's why conviction from 2014 became central to a shooting in 2026. So it can affect a lot of different things like where you can live, what jobs you can get, what rights you have. And in this particular case, it affects whether prosecutors believe he had any legal right to touch a gun at all. So the 2014 case wasn't just old background information. It became the legal key to the entire federal case. So basically, a big part of this is that he was not even supposed to have a gun in the first place. Now, eventually on April 23rd, 2026, it was announced that All-Star JR had been charged with unlawful possession of a firearm by a convicted felon. But that wasn't the only charge connected to the situation, because later on, he also caught an aggravated assault charge based on causing a traumatic brain or spine injury. So as of now, this is not attempted murder based on the reports. However, the state charged him with aggravated assault tied to the severity of Ben 10's injuries. And if convicted, he faces up to 15 years in federal prison and a possible $250,000 fine. Now, the way he got caught also matters because it wasn't just surveillance footage from inside the restaurant. According to prosecutors, it was his own content that helped put the case together. The videos, the social media posts. The FBI, working with the Houston police, used that material as part of the investigation. So basically, he went back to Michigan and essentially kept talking about it on social media, and prosecutors included that material as part of the case against him. So now the situation had completely shifted. And there's another part about this particular case as well, which is about the surveillance footage. Because they didn't only say that he fired a gun, they're also saying that the cameras allegedly captured what happened after the shooting as well. According to court documents, after the gunfire, All-Star JR allegedly tried to wipe down the weapon, then hid it near the hostess stand before leaving the restaurant. And that's one of those details that obviously can hurt him very badly legally. Because if the whole argument is I was only trying to survive, the next question becomes, then why wipe down a gun? Again, that's an allegation, right? Now, as for the particular social media post, one of the posts that actually caught a lot of traction said the following: had to shoot to the D and get new ice cause my man's Ben 10 took some of my stuff to the hospital with him. Now, whether you look at that as trolling, street talk, rap promotion, or just him trying to control the narrative, from a legal standpoint, that is the kind of thing that can come back to haunt you. But then again, this is also where real life and court can be two completely different things as far as perspective goes. Because if somebody really did try to rob you and they try to take your chains and they jumped you and beat you, and the whole thing backfired on them, a person in that situation might not exactly feel sorry for them afterward. They might look at it like, you brought this on yourself. And that's the mindset a lot of us probably understand, but the problem is the court doesn't care if the post made sense emotionally. They only care about this stuff legally. And legally, when you're trying to argue that you are only protecting yourself, taunting the people involved afterward can make the situation look way worse. He also released a music video that referenced the shooting. Now, I'm not going to quote any lyrics from the music video or the song, but the point is, they are looking at what he allegedly did after the shooting as well, artistically. And that's kind of the reason why a lot of this backfired, because if your argument is that you were only protecting yourself, taunting these people will make that argument look very weak, especially when they're arguing that the shooting continued after people were running. So based on a lot of the stuff that we know, a lot of us can understand why All-Star JR did protect himself. However, based on a case that they have against him, they're of course telling a much different story. They're not just saying that he fired during a chaotic fight. He continued to fire as people were running away, and then he allegedly returned to where he was lying motionless on the ground. And then he fired additional shots. So even if the situation started with him being attacked, it's what happened after the initial threat may have ended. So I guess the big question becomes, does All-Star JR deserve to get charged for this? Honestly, I think this is kind of where things get interesting. On one hand, he was getting robbed for his jewelry and was wrestled to the ground and beaten by multiple people. So obviously I understand why a lot of people look at it and say, how is he the one being charged? Because if somebody attacks you first, if somebody tries to rob you, that's how you're naturally going to feel. But then again, if they can show that the threat was no longer active, if they can show that people were running away, if they can show that one person was already on the ground, and if they can show that All-Star JR still allegedly walked back and fired additional rounds, it of course becomes a lot harder to argue that everything that happened was just protection. That's where this case gets messy. And then you do have to factor in his prior case from 2014. That in itself is a separate issue. Was he legally allowed to possess a gun at all? So that's the question here. And according to the prosecution in the state, the answer is no. So to me, it's not as simple as saying he should be charged or he shouldn't be charged. The more honest answer is, I understand why people feel like he was defending himself, but I also understand why this case didn't just disappear after investigators looked at the full sequence. I mean, they just took one look at the surveillance footage and they saw him standing over what appeared to be the person that he shot, Ben 10. And also keep in mind the situation this happened in, it was a bunch of people there. It was a packed restaurant. And also it doesn't really help the fact that after this entire thing happened, he went on social media and did what he did. And I do think he's way too seasoned to be moving like that after a situation this serious. I mean, he is 36 years old, so I think he should know better. When you do things like post about it afterward and you make references to what happened and you turn that real life situation into content, that can make the whole situation look worse for you and it can backfire. That's what happened here. So here you have a federal complaint, you have surveillance footage, the allegation that he fired additional rounds, the allegation that he tried to wipe down a gun, and the post he allegedly made afterward. So I think this is one of those situations where the self-defense argument might make sense emotionally, but legally it gets a lot harder once you start looking at everything that allegedly happened after the initial confrontation. But beyond All-Star JR, this case also brings up a bigger point. You never really know who you're messing with. And I don't know exactly why Ben 10 got into it with him that night. I'm not going to sit there and act like I know exactly what happened. But if this whole situation started because somebody wanted to punk a rapper, take his chains, embarrass him, or prove a point, then that decision could have not backfired any worse. Because you might think that you're about to walk out there with somebody's jewelry, and instead you end up walking yourself into one of the worst decisions of your life. And actually, you don't even end up walking out at all. So in this situation, that decision may have changed the way he moves for the rest of his life, or if he's able to move around freely for the rest of his life. And that's really the reality of situations like this. You never really know who you're playing with. You never know how somebody's going to react when they feel cornered. And you never know when a quick moment of trying to look tough can turn into consequences that last forever. Anyway, it looks like this rapper's self-defense case backfired. I'm very curious what you guys think about this. If you made it this far, drop a like on this video and subscribe if you're new here. Very curious what you guys think about this one, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace, I'm out.